Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer. Today we're joined by Scott M. Greer. That's correct. I'm the one talking today. So all those people are like, I hope you don't interrupt your guest. Why are you interrupting your guest? Well, you don't have to worry about that today. We'll let the guest speak freely and without interruption as much as possible because it's me. And it is my show, which is highly respected, not highly respectful. So we've got a couple of topics to cover today. We should have another episode with a guest on later this week or early next week. We'll be covering the JFK death and everything about the president with a very special guest. I can't reveal just yet who it will be, but you'll be very excited about it. So today, there's a bunch of news topics that are out there that need to be addressed, and I can just cover them by myself because, I love to give monologues. And now today, I'm free to talk as much as possible, and everyone could be happy. So the first topic we're actually going to talk about is there's some things going on with the presidential election, as you may imagine. Some of the things aren't going as well as Trump would have expected. He had his own GSA this week say that they're going to start the transition with Biden, which is a not very good indication that something's amiss, that Trump may be giving in the towel, or throwing in the towel, rather. So the big question is, can Trump still win? Well, there is always a chance he can still win, and there are still things going on that may end up helping Trump. In Wisconsin, they're still doing a recount, and one of his lawyers there is saying that they're finding a lot of suspicious ballots, and there's some Trump ballots that were never counted at all. We'll have to see how that turns out. And there's still legal challenges going on in Pennsylvania and a few other states. And there's still the Georgia recount that has not been fully completed. They're doing a second recount, and there may be a different result there. But by all indications, it's not looking as good as it did the day after the election. And as I said then when I, first talked about the election and what the result is, I'm still there. Trump won the election, but it was rigged, and the current result is a reflection of that rigging. And the only reason he would not win is if the institutions did not back him and the will of the people. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing a lot of right now, is that they're not backing him, is that we're seeing Republican traders openly demanding that Trump concede. We're seeing all these people even attack him and his supporters for daring to say that there was voter fraud involved. So this is going on. The GOP is not fully backing Trump. We have the courts not throwing out all of his lawsuits, no matter what evidence they're presenting. And we have the national news media, including conservative news media, attacking him and demanding that he concede. So this is not necessarily the type of groundswell of popular will that he needs. I mean, he still has his supporters on his side. Only 3% of Trump voters see Joe Biden as the legitimate winner, which is a very good way to look at this. And they're right. But, that's only his supporters, and unfortunately, they don't have control of the institutions. They're not the ones who are making the calls. It's unfortunately the elites in the media, the courts, and, these people who are counting the ballots and running these state operations who are ultimately going to count for this. His last chance is with these state legislatures, which I think a lot of them would like to do this, but they're worried about the consequences, as you saw with the Wayne County canvassers, a week ago, which they originally, the Republicans on the Board of Canvassers in Wayne County, Michigan, which is the county that covers Detroit, they initially voted against certifying it, which would have created this process, which could have led to the state legislator deciding who to send their electors to. But, of course, pressure got to them. Their families were threatened. Their kids' school were doxxed. And they've got thousands and thousands of death threats for people all over Twitter. And they changed their votes. Now, some people say, well, they went back on it. But, unfortunately, there's no going back on a vote like that. So all of these state lawmakers who have never dealt with this type of pressure, who, lead ordinary lives, they just go about their day. They're not receiving tens of thousands of death threats. They're not necessarily like the president of the United States or a senator, which this is something that comes with the territory. And if they vote to give their state's electoral votes to Trump when the results there are showing a different result, they are going to get the same type of backlash and many of them, unfortunately, will capitulate. So that is one thing you have to deal with. So a lot of people will think of this as a reason to blackpill. It's like, oh no, it's all over. It's hopeless. It's time to get rid of politics. I'm just going to get prepared to go to the prison camp. I'm packing right now. Everything is over. Oh no. It's never a good time to blackpill. Never blackpill. If you're blackpilling, as I said before, you are just a black-pilled beta cuck. That's the end of the story. That's what you are. So there are still a fight to go on. Like, it is not ever over. I mean, life is going to go on no matter what the election results occur. And our cause is not going away. Over 74 million Americans voted for nationalism. That's what Trump represented. And those people, as these polls are showing, believe he's the legitimate winner. They're still going to be radicalized. They're still going to be energized by this message going forward. You know, this is not immediate reset back to 2014, which we'll talk about later on in the episode. There's a lot of people who are very eager for this 2014 reset, but the people aren't. And in any case, that's not going to happen. Our fight goes on. Our cause is not disappearing. There is many new opportunities and challenges that are going to arise over the next 4 years, regardless of how the election occurs. Yes, of course, it would be better if Trump won. It would, of course, be better if he stayed president. Everyone's in agreement on that. But you have to take the circumstances, however they may result in, and go from there. And, you know, it is never a good time to blackpill. I don't like seeing the blackpillers on my timeline. As always, I'm still whitepilled. It's still in my name. And I think that ultimately, in the end, we win. And that's all you need to remember. And that's all you need to know. So with that in mind, it's time to move on to one of the fights going forward in the future of the GOP. And that is, of course, the Georgia Senate runoffs. So a lot of conservatives are freaking out right now that Trump voters are not going to show up in January for the Georgia Senate runoffs, which of course feature two Republicans that are fairly okay. One is pretty good. The other one is just an establishmentarian, not that important. The two people, of course, are David Perdue, who is fairly good. He co-sponsored the RAISE Act. He's been pretty solid on immigration for most of his career. He's been a little disappointing this year. He didn't sign the Senate letter, demanding an expansion and extension of Trump's immigration moratorium. There were 4 senators. He was not one of them. He was also advocating for guest workers during the height of the coronavirus pandemic, when there was millions of Americans out of work. But ultimately, he's still one of the better senators on immigration. I would put him in the top 5 in that regard. The other one is Kelly Loeffler, who is a total establishmentarian. Her husband has advocated for amnesty. Her husband is the primary reason she has a political career. He's a huge multimillionaire, head of the New York Stock Exchange, total business first Republican. But she did differentiate herself by strongly attacking Black Lives Matter over the summer and jeopardizing her ownership of a WNBA team. But owning a WNBA team in the first place is a pretty big red flag. But in case, ultimately we would, in the general sphere of things, want these people to win. At least David Perdue. But a lot of Trump voters aren't feeling it because they've seen their Republican Party not fight for their president. They've seen them throw in the towel, that they are not seeing enough of a fight out of them, and they're not getting the proper recount in Georgia. Also, state party officials, like Brian Kemp, governor, the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, are openly, well, at least in Raffensperger's case, are openly mocking Trump and his supporters and saying, like, you lost, yeah, you should have done better. And now he's like, can you guys please turn out to vote? Please turn out. We need you. We need to keep this Senate. And this is being echoed by conservatives such as, Matt Walsh, Ryan Savija, Robbie Starbuck, many, many others who are all saying we need to win the Senate. We have to keep it. There's going to be total apocalypse if we lose. They're going to make D.C. and Puerto Rico states. They're going to take all your gun rights away. They're going to put illegal immigrants in your front lawn. Everything in the world is just going to happen that could go wrong is going to happen if they lose the Senate runoffs. So in some ways, I'm sympathetic to that argument because, a lot of people were making the same argument if Biden won, but by all accounts, if the GOP is going to throw in the towel, Biden will win, and you can't really stop his executive power with the legislature, as we've seen in Trump's term, and you have to fight with litigation in other ways. It's not going to. If President Biden wants to eliminate all of Trump's immigration gains, he could do that without the legislature stepping in and stopping that, unfortunately. So there are a couple big points to address here. First off, if the GOP wants to ensure its Senate majority, it must insist on a full and proper audit, not just because it can win over Trump voters and say, we did everything possible to fight this rigging and we are standing up for your interests, but it would actually gain David Perdue the Senate seat outright, because he only needs around 15,000 to increase his margin of victory by around 15,000 votes to win outright. And no runoff needed. They could easily do this, but they're not doing this. They're not demanding a full and proper audit from these Democratic counties in Atlanta. These counties are giving in a half-assed audit. They're not allowing observers. They're just scanning the thing. No real additional scrutiny. That's it. They're letting this happen. And the GOP is not doing anything about it. Second off, when they want to blame Trump voters for the possible loss that's going to happen in January, which we don't know what's going to happen, they're ignoring how the state is allowing all these mechanisms that allowed the Democrats to steal it on November 3rd to continue. They're allowing extended deadlines on these ballot drop-off boxes. They're allowing all these different things. Brian Kemp and Raffensperger are doing this, and they're refusing to call a state assembly to fix these problems. So if you really want to blame people for giving this election away in the runoffs and giving away the supposed greatness of the Senate majority, look at the state party leaders in Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger. Don't look at ordinary Trump voters who are disappointed with their party and do not have the motivation to go out and vote in the cold on January 5th to vote for a party that betrayed their president just because they need to, because Mitch McConnell said so. And third, as I alluded to earlier, it's not the end of the world if the GOP doesn't win the majority. I mean, it's not good. Of course, there are some issues with it. It increases the chances that amnesty could pass. It increases the chances that some type of gun controls could be passed. It increases the chances that these stupid BLM handouts that the Democrats want to do, and a lot of Republicans want to do as well, could pass. But it doesn't increase it significantly because there are still two moderate Democrats in there, Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin, who have said that they don't want to vote to eliminate the filibuster. They're not going to go along with some of these radical ideas. Kristen Sinema is actually probably better on immigration amnesty than half of Republicans. And, Manchin will follow the party line on that, but there are some things he won't go along with. So you have to keep that in mind. And they're promising the end of the world and that everything that you have ever loved and cherished is going to be taken away from you if the Democrats, if their Democrats have a one vote majority that's really a tiebreaker vote brought by the vice president if the Republicans lose these Senate runoffs in Georgia. So, you have to be skeptical about that. And at the end of the day, the real important election was the presidential election. Republicans didn't get blown out in the Senate, so they have padded, themselves from a lot of the worst excesses that Democrats were planning. And I don't think there is really a stomach to eliminate the filibuster, to do a lot of these radical proposals that they want. And even when it comes to amnesty, Biden is having trouble from his own left flank on this. Like, the left-wing activists don't want a comprehensive immigration reform, which is what the euphemism they've always used for it at all, because they know they have to give stuff to Republicans. They have to promise border security that will never be delivered. They'll promise tougher enforcement on illegal immigrants, which not necessarily will happen. And all these things. And all these left-wing activists say that's a fascism, that's a white supremacy. They can't do that. All they want is a straight-up amnesty that allows for more illegal immigration and more immigration in general. And Republicans, even if they may want that, they know they can't sell that to the base. So I don't think that's going to happen. And also, I think a lot of Republicans realize that they don't need amnesty to win over Hispanics. And they didn't need it before. I mean, that was a stupid idea. But after the 2012 election defeat, this is a very common trope that the only way the party can survive is through amnesty. You're not seeing that trope right now, not even in the mainstream media, and especially not in conservative media. And the number one voice in conservative media right now is Tucker Carlson, who is resolutely opposed to this. The two biggest voices at that time, Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly, were actually, open to it. And ultimately, Bill O'Reilly endorsed the Gang of Eight amnesty bill. So you would not see that this time. Conservative media would be 100% opposed to it. All of these senators who want to run for president in 2024 are going to know that it's a terrible idea for them and a terrible idea for their future. So I don't necessarily see that happening, even if they lose the Senate runoffs. So everyone wants to promise the end of the world, if the GOP loses. It's not good. If they win the runoffs, it decreases the chances of all this horrible legislation being passed. And they could probably stop a lot of Biden's judicial nominees and some of his radical cabinet appointments. But, that's it. I mean, and at the end of the day, he can still pick his judicial nominees and cabinet people. And Mitch McConnell has been open about working with him on this matter. So you have to realize that. And that's another point I want to say is that, the GOP's, propaganda organs are promising the end of the world. Meanwhile, GOP leaders are talking about how much they look forward to working with Joe Biden. Mitch McConnell has said this. John Cornyn and Lindsey Graham have talked about how much they look forward to passing amnesty. And John Cornyn's like, I've been so disappointed that we haven't been able to do this. And I'm hoping we can work together some bipartisan legislation on this matter. And why are we voting for this? So we're giving you a majority so you can screw over the base just so you can have the appearance of bipartisanship? What? No, that's not what we're voting for. So, to go on to the general point of, and I put out a poll question about this, and most people said yes to the question of whether the Trump voters should punish the GOP by not showing up for the Georgia runoffs. And about over 63% of the people in the poll I put that out there on Twitter said yes. I would lean more to no on this matter, just for a couple different reasons. As I've said before, it's ultimately better if the GOP has this majority. And there is a kind of, you don't really gain the type of power you think you do by voting against your own side or voting against your allies. And not necessarily your own side here, but voting against your allies. And there's a lot of people on the right who think that the more you punish your allies or the people who are closest to you, the more you gain power. And that doesn't necessarily work in politics. I mean, it's the jilted lover theory of political power, which there's a couple different examples showing that this isn't the case. You have to look in 2016 when all these Bernie Sanders voters went to Jill Stein. The party did not go in that direction over time. And these Jill Stein voters and the Bernie Sanders people were blamed for why Hillary Clinton lost. And now we see this in, a possible Biden administration. There are nothing given to the far left. Joe Biden is like the complete opposite of what Bernie Sanders is, and that's now their leader. And this is what happened. I mean, and they punished the Democratic Party by voting for Jill Stein, and that proved crucial in a lot of these Rust Belt states. But in the end, they were blamed for the loss, and it didn't really help their power within the Democratic Party, and Bernie Sanders suffered an even more humiliating defeat in 2020. There's also an example in Canada recently. Last year, Maxime Bernier decided to build this, National Populist Party. It was more libertarian than populist, but they were strongly against immigration in the People's Party of Canada. And this was a split off from the Conservative Party. And Maxime Bernier was a serious force within the Conservative Party. This wasn't just some backbencher or some nobody who decided to start a political party. He was nearly the leader, and it was almost a rigged party election that ensured that he wasn't the leader. And afterwards, he decided, I'm going to start my own party because these guys are cucks, and they're terrible on this matter. Which he had a point there. But when his party proved a spoiler for the Conservatives, they didn't win the majority, and Justin Trudeau was able to manage to retain the majority and stay in power. And now the Conservative Party, even though they've seen the Nationalists spoil their election victories, has gone even further to the left, and they're blaming Bernier and his supporters for all their loss. And Bernier and the People's Party is, being further marginalized in Canadian politics. So there's always this question that, if you act like a spurned lover, they're going to continue to spurn you as well. They're not going to negotiate with jilted lovers. With this, there's the chance of that happening, but there's also the chance of them saying, without Trump, you cannot motivate these people and you have to stay loyal to Trumpism. So there's two possibilities to that. I mean, Conservative Inc. is already blaming Trumpism and Trump himself for their possible defeat in these runoffs. And even if they do win the runoffs, they're not going to give him credit, even if he goes and rallies for Loeffler and Perdue, they're not going to give him credit for it because they don't want to. I mean, they're already looking forward to this reset, which we'll talk about later on the show. So they have these things in mind that they want to do, and they've already got their narrative set aside. One of the key aspects of this narrative is that the GOP can do so much better without Trump, and if they gain the Senate majority with Trump losing the presidential election, they're going to be so smug and be like, you know what wins elections? Just normal milquetoast GOP people. That's what they want to run with. Mitch McConnell loves that. And Mitch McConnell has no loyalty to Trump. He's got everything he wanted out of Trump. He got the eliminated regulations. He got his judicial appointments. He got the tax cuts. He's done with Trump. He doesn't have any loyalty to him, but he demands that majority so he can retain his majority leadership. That's all he cares about. And there would be something satisfying about Mitch McConnell becoming minority leader. I really don't like this Mitch McConnell hagiography with a Cocaine Mitch. Oh man, he's so badass. Cocaine Mitch always wins. Fuck Mitch McConnell. He sucks. He's never been on side. He only cares about his own political power, and he is not on our side. I don't really care about, of course he's an effective political operator and a power mover in DC, but it's rarely in the interests of the middle American people. So I don't really care about him retaining a Senate majority leadership. There is something needed for these GOP hacks who rushed to pretend they were Trump supporters and Trump cheerleaders during his presidency, and now they're returning back to just caring about Cocaine Mitch's agenda. Like, who cares about his agenda? It'd be, there is some schadenfreude by seeing him lose his majority leadership. So there's that one thing, and if they win, they can further cement that narrative that their party is much better without Trump, and that any Republican could have won the 2020 election if it wasn't for Trump, which is a false narrative, and we should always combat and challenge. So I think the proper response to the Georgia Senate runoffs is that Trump voters should go out and vote, but they must insist on proper conditions. First off, the party must, change these voter laws that allow the Democrats to steal the elections. They must call the state assembly and they must enact changes now. And they must demand a full and fair audit of these results and not let these Democratic counties in Atlanta half-ass it. That's number one. Second, both Loeffler and Perdue must make pledges to their voters that they will not look forward to making deals with Joe Biden, and they will not pass any amnesty or any liberalization of immigration laws. They will not support any gun restrictions, and they will not, absolutely not, vote for any Black Lives Matter handout. And they will also insist on reforming America's voter ID laws and election laws in general to ensure that we have free and fair elections and that the historic American people are not disenfranchised again like they were in the 2020 election. These must be insisted on. These are not, something they can think about. These conditions must be met in order to energize the base, because right now they're not offering the base shit. They're just telling them, they're calling them idiots, they're calling them Q-tards, they're yelling at them and demanding that they vote for them while the base gets nothing in return. These conditions must be met in order for the base to show up. And if they offer those conditions, then sure enough, they should win. Or if even better, if Trump wins the recount, In Georgia, which should also make David Perdue the outright winner in his race, we don't even have to worry about this because the GOP has the Senate majority and everyone's happy. But for some reason, the GOP doesn't want to insist on it. They just want Trump to lose and for them to retain the Senate majority. Makes you think, huh? So one final point I want to make before moving on to the Biden transition is that there is a lot of arguments over who exactly were these whites that voted against Trump and like who moved away from him. And as we've talked about in previous episodes, there's a certain demographic who calls themselves the 5%ers, not to be confused with the Nation of Islam offshoot that's popular with rappers and is into a whole bunch of crazy stuff. The 5%ers argue that it was white working class voters who were upset with Trump failing to enact national populist agenda items. But there's been a lot of evidence showing that the whites who moved away from Trump are a very different demographic, and it's actually affluent white liberals living in the suburbs. Well, they used to be Republicans, but now they've moved farther to the left. And there's plenty of evidence for this, is that a lot of people have put together maps of showing counties and how they've shifted, whether they've shifted to red or to blue. And if you look at these maps and you look at these counties that have gone the furthest blue, it's all of these affluent suburbs near Dallas, Austin, Minneapolis, Detroit, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Atlanta especially. And these are the places where they are. And you have to ask, well, what motivated them? The New York Times had an incredible article. It's incredible in ways that you're not going to enjoy it, but you're almost going to lose your mind when you read it. About this town in Minnesota that's a suburb of Minneapolis, Chaska, and how this city in 2016, it went 6 points for Trump. In 2020, it went 9 points for Biden. Well, what changed? Well, they all got psyoped by Black Lives Matter, and now they think that Trump is a racist and a xenophobe, and they must do more to resist his evil tyranny. And they interviewed these people, and they found one Biden to Trump voter, and this woman had no idea that Trump, when he talked about immigration, he wanted less of it, and he wanted to restrict it. She thought he meant that he wanted to bring more immigrants here, that he wanted to give amnesty, which shows you, people aren't necessarily well informed. And the rest of the community was all talking about, oh, we saw the riots and we realized how bad it is for blacks and how much hurt they're going through. So we're now supporting Black Lives Matter and we support racial equity. And these are the type of people who've moved away from Trump that, they've suffered so much brainwashing from the mainstream media over the last 4 years, and especially among suburban women, that they've moved to the Democrats in a way that wasn't expected. Now you can just say it's like, oh, Trump's tone really turned them off, and we need a more respectful and decent representative of Trumpism to win these people back. And that's not necessarily the case. I mean, the media is always going to psyop and brainwash these people. And if they are that delusional to see riots and be further committed to Black Lives Matter and these stupid, idiotic notions about racial justice, then they're a hopeless cause. So when you want to look at who caused who caused the results that we see now and what type of whites moved away from Trump, it's not necessarily the base of these working class whites who, as I've said previously, Trump actually got a higher percentage of non-college educated whites than he did he won more of them rather than he did in 2016. It went from 66% in 2016 to 67% in 2020. But it changed significantly among college-educated whites. And if you look at these maps, these suburbs are starting to turn blue. And how you offset that or change that, that's a big issue that cannot be solved in a short amount of time on Highly Respected. But we will continue to keep an eye on this subject. But now, on to the Biden transition. Joe Biden is making a lot of announcements right now. He's very eager to tell the world about all these great appointments he will make in his cabinet. And me and Nicola Soldo talked about this last week. We were all saying that this is going to be the return of this really cringe neoliberal foreign policy that's sending awfuls all around the world to spread democracy and spread liberal values. And sure enough, with all the appointments he's announced this week, it's going to return with a vengeance. So his big announcement was his Secretary of State nominee, Tony Blinken. Blinken is an Obama alumnus who supported all the administration's agenda items, fully on board with that. Is definitely somebody who believes in spreading neoliberalism all over the world. And he really announced himself with this. I want to backtrack just a little bit, is that Biden yesterday had all of his nominees behind him as he made this grand announcement. And it's this very surreal thing, is they're all standing apart, 6 feet apart, all masked up, all like far in the background as like Biden approaches. And it's like, these are my nominees. And they're all standing apart, masked up. And it's just like a weird thing. But liberals love this. They love the mask, as we're seeing at the DNC. Everyone was masked up, even if they were on a Zoom call. They had to like do their speech on a Zoom call with a mask on. They really like these aesthetics, and it's cringe aesthetics in general. But that's what the Democrats are about. But when Tony Blinken approached, I really think this really embodies his foreign policies. He talked about his stepfather, who was a Holocaust survivor, and how his stepfather was on a death march and he escaped. And then he ran into an American tank. And sure enough, a black GI emerged. And his stepfather knew no English except to get on his knees and say, "God bless America." But you never got to be like, I think my bullshit detector is going off. This story seems a little too perfect. Funny enough, it is too perfect, as there was this huge media narrative, media myth in the 80s and 90s that the 761st Tank Battalion, which was the one and only all-black tank battalion. Of course, the American military during World War II was segregated, so there weren't going to be black tank men in a white unit. And this has been the only tank unit where blacks would have served in. And there was this huge media myth that this tank battalion liberated Dachau and Buchenwald. And, there was a whole PBS documentary made about it, calling them the liberators, and like, this is awesome. And the blacks helped end the Holocaust, which is a very appealing narrative to liberals. Well, it turned out that there was absolutely no evidence for that. And these guys in the unit remembered freeing a concentration camp, but they couldn't remember which one. And they just said, oh, yeah, it's Dachau. Tony Blinken's stepfather was imprisoned at Dachau. So this is important to go along with this. It turned out that the one prison camp that they likely had a role in was a concentration camp in Austria that housed only political prisoners, most of them ethnic Poles. There were no Jews there, or at least very few Jews there. And that's not where Tony Blinken's stepfather was at. He was at Dachau. And even though he was, this is Death March, a little bit of distance away, it was in the general area. And it's very unlikely he was liberated by black tankmen. But it's too good to pass up this narrative. And liberals were fawning over it. They're like, this is America. And you have to wonder, is it really America to build it yourself on a tall tale that's not based in reality? But that's for liberals the case. And so Tony Blinken begins his career by sharing a liberal myth that's not rooted in reality. And the others have similar terrible credentials and terrible speeches as well. Joe Biden's nominee for the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, went up there and gave the most awful speech that I could think of. She went up there and said it's her task as Director of National Intelligence to speak truth to power. No, you speak power to truth. You're the Director of National Intelligence. National Intelligence isn't just some plucky guys going up to power, be like, oh no, there's a terrorist threat. Please listen to us. No, they are power. It's very weird for awfuls to imagine themselves as the underdogs when they're controlling the CIA, but this is their mentality, and somehow the CIA agents are not plotting coups all over the world and backing Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They're actually just entrepreneurial, plucky little agents slaving away and that they're speaking truth to power. You have to ask, is like, who is power here? I guess it's the evil white man who is disenfranchised from his government and has no role in this Biden administration except for bending the knee before awfuls and people of color. But they'll insist on going along with this. His DHS nominee, Alejandro Mayorkas, I'm probably butchering his name a little bit. When he announced that he was the nominee, he pretty much only talked about the priority for DHS secretary is to just defend immigrants. He is saying, I'm the child of immigrants, and I know that our nation needs to stand as a refuge to the world, and also, by the way, we need to counter national security threats. And like Homeland Security, offering a refuge to the world, I think there's some discrepancies there. I think there's some cognitive dissonance going on. And then he nominated for his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, who may be the worst of the bunch. He was Hillary Clinton's chief policy head. He is a fervent supporter of foreign interventions. He was the loudest cheerleader for the Libyan intervention. And there's an email that was leaked in WikiLeaks where he said, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. So this is the person who is going to be in charge, is going to be our national security advisor, somebody who sees Al-Qaeda as a potential ally against Bashar al-Assad and any of these people that, faddish dictators that liberals decide must go because they're seeing crying kids on their TV and that's making them cry. So Bashar al-Assad and Muammar Gaddafi and all these people have to go in order to please their own little, emotions. And once they go, of course, there's a huge vacuum and chaos in the region, but they don't really care about that. All they care about is getting back at these evil bullies that look bad on TV, and CNN is saying that they're a dictator. And Jake Sullivan is the embodiment of that. He really is fully all about that foreign policy, and they'll make allies with Islamic terrorists who actually want to blow up Americans and Westerners just so they can take down Bashar al-Assad, who is not really a threat to Americans or Westerners, at least compared to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So that's their foreign policy as represented by these idiots. And Nicolo and I were right that they are going to bring back neoliberal foreign policy with a vengeance. It's going to be far worse than Barack Obama's second term. This is Barack Obama's first term foreign policy, which was dictated largely by Hillary Clinton, and this is represented by his picks. So while Biden is resetting our foreign policy to the Obama years, the media is resetting itself to its fawning coverage of the Obama years. Many of these journalists when they're seeing and covering these nominees, they're not covering what they believe, what's their past record, or what's their ideology. They're talking about whether they play guitar, what's their favorite kind of socks, how they're empowering women, or their immigrant background. It is disgusting. It's pathetic. But this is how they did coverage back in 2014 and during the Obama years. They would just talk about like, oh, John Kerry can play his guitar and sing music. And there was this reporter, Matt Visor, I think he's with Politico, who had this very serious tweet. There was no sense of irony, where he said John Kerry brought his guitar along with him around his global visits as Secretary of State. Tony Blinken will also do the same. This was their news coverage. There was a Bloomberg reporter who talked about Biden's socks and how they're so eclectic and really grab the eye. And this is exactly the type, and they were all fawning over Avril Haines, her saying that she's going to speak truth to power, not understanding that she's going to be the lead spook and she's going to be spying on ordinary Americans with her job, but somehow they think that's speaking truth to power. They're fawning over Tony Blinken's story about his stepfather and getting liberated by a black tankman in World War II. And these are the type of things they're running with. And there's no sense of criticism, no sense of doubt. They're fully loving this moment because they think that we're having a full reset. This is what I call room service journalism. They're up there, Biden and his cronies are dinging the bell, and they rush up journalism like, here's your puff piece about your clothing and how you're so stylish. Please give me more scoops. And the scoops is like, I like to wear Navy socks on Wednesday. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I can't wait to run this in Politico. And this is the type of coverage that they were doing. And this was all that was when I first moved up to Washington, D.C. in 2013, and what I saw throughout the time period up until Trump, announced his candidacy for president in 2015. This was all of their coverage. They talked about their buddies. They're friends with these people. They know that this coverage gets them better access, and they can go get invited to their parties and get scoops about what may happen. But it's all scoops that they have control of, the officials that they're fawning over, that they control them. And this was the case throughout the Obama years. And this was even most campaign coverage in 2016 prior to Trump getting elected. I remember then that there was these Politico and Hill stories talking that were like 1,000 words long. And it was just about how awesome this press secretary that a candidate hired is. And they're like, and anytime they're like, this person got hired by the campaign, and then journalists would go, great get. And it's like, who gives a shit? Like, who gives a shit that Jeb Bush hired Tim Miller? There was like at least 8 stories about Jeb Bush hiring Tim Miller as his spokesman. Who gives a shit? Like, these people are terrible, but they all do this because they know this means more access, and they're friends of these people, and their friends ask for this coverage. It's like, hey, can you write up a cool story about me? And they're like, sure. And they don't want to piss off each other, so they go along with this. This is how Washington, D.C. works. This is the swamp. It's full of room service journalism, and they're only going to do confrontational and challenging journalism if they actually hate this person, if it's a Republican or Trump. They want to go back to this. They don't like confrontational coverage. They want to just ask people about what like songs they're listening to, as Barack Obama always releases his like summer playlist. It's like, why do we care about this? Or ask them what like books they're reading. Like, this is the type of coverage they want to do. And this is what they're going to return to. And it means that they can get along with their friends while they're attacked. And, they're not friends with the Republicans and people who support Trump. So that's why they're willing to attack them and willing to challenge them in a way that they'll never do for Democrats. Another point as to why they won't do any challenging or confrontational reporting is because the media and Democrats have decided that all challenging information is Russian disinformation. So anytime that there was going to be some devastating story about Biden, they can claim this comes straight from the Kremlin. This is undermining our national security. How dare you run this story? And they'll say that this is based on faulty information. Twitter and Facebook will censor it, and this reporter will be hounded by other blue checks and called a traitor to this country. And they've set this precedent, and we're going to see this. If the Biden administration happens, we're going to see this throughout the 4 years. That's the way it's going to happen. That they're not going to publish any damaging information at the risk and the fear of being called a Kremlin stooge. This is the precedent. This is what they did throughout the Trump administration. This is why they published no damaging coverage of Biden when he became the nominee. They set aside the sexual harassment and sexual assault charges that happened to him that were far more credible than was laid against Brett Kavanaugh. They said, oh, this is disinformation. This is a right-wing smear operation. We're not going to take this seriously. They did this with Hunter Biden's laptop. They did this with Hunter Biden in general, who is an otherwise scumbag, who is clearly influencing, peddling off his dad's name, and his dad is aware of it and is taking a cut, but they showed no interest in it. And they're going to maintain this position throughout the administration if it occurs. So room service journalism is here to stay. It's going to be the norm, and conservative media is in a much weaker position than it was in the Obama years. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with it. And so you're going to be seeing a lot of cringe on Twitter for the years to come. So be prepared to dunk on them. But I guarantee you journalists are going to be demanding censoring people who are attacking their noble coverage about what color of suits Joe Biden likes to wear. So that's it for the general discussion topics. Now on to the patron questions. We've got 2 great questions today from our patrons. And as a reminder, you too can get the power to ask questions on Highly Respected if you sign up for the patron option at Highly Respected's Patreon. So highly recommend that, as always. So we've got 2 great questions. The first one comes from Bill. Bill asks, Scott, you are obviously someone who is very involved in establishment conservative politics. Is your strategy one worth replicating, or are real conservatives better off working in the non-political private sector and building power there? Well, I would say for most people that they should stay in the private sector. I don't think conservative Inc. is not where you make money. You could be stuck at dead-end jobs. A lot of people I've known who've just got in, thought they were going to do all these great things, and they're kind of stuck at these dead-end jobs that don't really matter, and they're not really having much influence. That said, that's not me saying that nobody should do this. It is more difficult to replicate now than when I was there. They weren't really aware of our beliefs when we were going around. It wasn't necessarily like the secret infiltrator is like, oh, I'm in there. I'm a secret agent. I'm like, they don't know who I am and all this stuff. It's like a lot of people at Daily Caller knew that I was like a nationalist and they knew that I was right wing. It wasn't a huge surprise to them about my beliefs. But you know, now some places they are much more zealous in trying to root people out. I think at the places that I've been at, Leadership Institute, they will get outraged at any mention of nationalist ideas. They're like, how dare you even mention this? Campus Reform, which I got my career start off, wiped away any mention of me from their website. Like, it's not like I ever existed. And I got like drudge hits there and got featured. And some of my news stories got featured on Fox News, but all those news articles are gone now. It's whatever. It's rather funny more than anything. So Campus Reform and Leadership Institute are very zealous about that. Daily Caller is very zealous about that, unless you're really good friends with Neil Patel, who's running that, and he'll make exceptions for some people, but they're very zealous on ensuring that people aren't posting anything too right wing. But people are going to get involved in this, and people from conservative media are going to be interested in our ideas, and it's still a way to promote nationalism to, normal boomers and normie conservatives. And I think it was pretty effective in helping Trump out and helping spread our ideas in the 2016 election. I was one of the few, and I was probably the first person to actually like Trump and support him at the Daily Caller office. And when I was there, I was able to write columns defending his statements, defending his policy positions. And, very few people in conservative media were doing that. I was one of the only people who was doing that in 2015 and the 2016 primary. Very few people doing that. Everyone was attacking him. Everyone was castigating him and saying he's the worst thing to ever happen to the conservative movement. And this was the common line throughout conservative media with the exception of Breitbart. And also, when I was an editor, I was able to, pitch ideas to people. And, when people were writing hyperbolic articles about Trump, I was like, I don't think this is correct. And, I was able to check on some of the excesses at the Caller. So there was a benefit there. Whether it's the access to power, I wouldn't necessarily say so. I think if you're somebody who's, in normal middle America, working a normal job, I think the easiest way to get involved in politics is and some people are going to get very mad at this, is just to get involved in your local GOP. And now I can already hear people like, no, you can't get involved in the GOP. That's the worst idea ever. There's these, Wignats are very insistent that, they get triggered and very traumatized by any mention of joining your local GOP or getting involved in GOP politics, even though there's not necessarily a real side effect. And I know people who have gotten involved and now are running their local county, parties or the local district parties. And it is a way to get to meet like-minded people. And it's also a way to meet candidates. And when these candidates go to your county meeting and they're going to talk about their policy positions, you can ask them like, hey, what do you think about immigration? Hey, what do you think about Black Lives Matter? Hey, what do you think about criminal justice reform? What do you think about foreign policy? And you can be on the hot seat. And if you have the whole county on your side, you can really make these guys sweat and move to our positions just by having that. And these places do have a degree of power. And A lot of these people are just normie boomers. They don't understand this stuff. And they don't understand like what's so outrageous about what you're saying. They're like, well, what you're saying is what Donald Trump and Tucker Carlson say. I don't understand these leftists attacking you, and I hate Antifa more than anything you'll be about. So you really just, you can, and this can all be accomplished while working your normal job. You go there once a month, you talk to them, and if you're under the age of 40, they're going to be very excited to see you because there's very few people under 40. I remember when I was working a campaign in 2013, me and another person who were very young went to this anti-illegal immigration group in Houston. And we were the only people under 50 there, and they were excited for us to see us there. It was like walking into to a locker room, and you're like a hot female, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is awesome!" They were glad to see us. They would have accepted anything we said because they love to see young people. And if you're a person under 30 who's normal, can talk to people and not frighten them and go on autistic rants, you could really have a lot of influence there. And these local county parties are not going to go away, and they do hold a degree of influence over campaigns and candidates. And certainly the representatives, if a representative knows that he's alienating this county, this county GOP, he's going to try to meet them in the middle. He's going to try to compromise them and try to work to them and move to their positions because he doesn't want that county GOP backing a primary challenger. So if you want to get involved in politically, I recommend that rather than coming out of college and try to do the conservative Inc. route. Some people can do that. But I think it only should be a few people. And I think a lot of these people working in conservative media are going to come to our side naturally because they realize that the old ideas that Conservative Inc. still talks about, they're still thinking that this is 2012 and they can get away with conservatarianism, and they're very eager to move back to the pre-Trump era. They're going to see that there's a new era, and they're bored by the old, and they don't really care about what Milton Friedman says. They want something new. And I think a lot of them, and I know a lot of them, are secretly listening to our podcasts and watching our shows. They may not tell that to their employer for good reasons, but a lot of these people are getting influenced by us, and we're not even aware of it, or we're not even connected to them. So that's my advice on that matter. So to the second question. This one comes from Matt. He asks, how should we feel about the vaccine? Will you take the vaccine? Will it be mandatory for everyone to get it? Will corporations make it de facto mandatory? For example, will Delta prevent people from flying unless they can prove they've taken the vaccine? Well, I'm kind of in the middle about the vaccine. I mean, we should support the vaccine. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I am sympathetic to some of their causes. And I don't like the idea that, they're going to send police to your door and throw you down and stick the needle in you if you don't have the vaccine. I don't really like this brute force mentality that they want to use. And liberals love this. Like, you must take the vaccine. And they really want to punish people who for whatever reason, decide they don't want to take it. And there could be real serious side effects to the vaccine. Whether I'll take it or not, I have to see what's going on with it. I mean, if it has serious side effects and other things, then maybe I might hesitate. I definitely will be mandatory for everyone to take. And corporations are certainly going to punish people if they refuse to take it. I can imagine that airlines like Delta will not allow you to fly if you do not take the vaccine. I even imagine that it could be, we've always warned about tech totalitarianism. Like if you have a smart refrigerator and it finds out you're a racist and you're trying to tap in, it's like, open the refrigerator. And it's like, sorry, we found out you're a racist. We cannot continue your service. And you're like, I need to eat. And, we could very well see this type of stuff if you don't take the vaccine. I mean, it could get very serious where you're not allowed to experience normal services a human could have or a normal citizen could have because you don't take the vaccine. And of course that's unconstitutional, but they don't care about the Constitution. They think that they can do whatever they want. I mean, Larry Hogan this week was saying, you don't have a constitutional right to drive drunk. And he was saying this in response to people who don't want to wear masks. Drunk driving is a little bit different from not wearing a mask while you're walking outside. But they're using these really insidious arguments to undermine our basic liberties and to force everyone to take this vaccine. Now, I'm probably saying the vaccine is going to be good. Hopefully it's going to be good. I probably will take it. I mean, depending on the circumstances. We'll see. Well, maybe it's much worse than we expected, but we'll have to see. But I really don't like the total pro-vaxxer position where everyone must take this vaccine no matter what your reasons. And if you don't take the vaccine, you deserve the full punishment of society and full social ostracism. So we're definitely going to see that with the vaccine. And with that, we are out of time today. I hope you enjoyed me going on for a monologue for nearly an hour. Of course, you all love my voice and you love hearing what I have to say. And you know what? I didn't interrupt Scott M. Greer today. So hopefully you enjoyed that. And, we're going to have some great episodes coming up. As I was saying earlier, we'll have one soon enough. I think later this week or early next week, we should be talking to our very special guest about JFK. And so be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.